Come, students, let's listen to the Gospel of St. Lasch. We shall be reading from the Culture of Narcissism, Schooling and the New Illiteracy. Chapter 6. Subsection: Basic Education versus National Defense Education. By the 1950s, the trivialization of high school curriculum had become unmistakable. Two groups of critics have emerged. The first, led by Arthur Bestor, Albert Lind, Mortimer Smith, and the Council for Basic Education, attacked the imperialistic expansion of the school system. They denied that the school should socialize the whole child, assume functions of the family and the church serve as an agency of industrial recruitment. They argued that schools' only responsibility was to provide basic intellectual training and to extend this training to everyone. They deplored anti-intellectualism, but also condemned the tracking system. According to Smith, educators used Dewey's ideas that the school should serve as the child's needs as an excuse for avoiding their responsibility to extend basic education to every child. This dogma enabled the teacher who finds Johnny and Mary a little dull-witted in academic subjects to ease up on them on the basis of supposed lack of interest and ability, and to shove them into more courses in manual training or industrial arts or home economics, where mechanical skills take precedence over thinking. Pause. Side note. You will notice this debate is essentially a similar debate to what we've had 3 different times in my lifetime. Are we doing basic education, social education, or skills education for industry? The second group of critics attacked the American education not because it was both anti-intellectual and undemocratic, but because it failed to turn out enough scientists and high-level technicians. Sound familiar? Educational reformers like Vannevar Bush, James P. Conant, and Vice Admiral Hyman G. Rickover insisted that the United States lagged behind the Soviet Union in the arms race because the schools had failed to provide an efficient system of manpower selection. After the Russians launched a space capsule in 1957, this kind of criticism forced educators to institute new methods of training in sciences and mathematics, which stressed assimilation of basic concepts rather than memorization of facts. Although Condit, Rickover, and their followers called for a return to basics, their program had little in common with the reforms advocated by the Council of Basic Education. They did not question the school's function as an instrument of military and industrial recruitment. They merely sought to make the selection process more efficient. Both Condit and Bush favored a system of universal military service in debates over that issue in the late 40s. They saw such a system as a means of enlisting young people into the service of the state and as an effective sorting device, where manpower requirements could be assessed in light of military necessity. When universal military service was finally defeated by those who shrank from giving the military complete control over manpower recruitment, the country adopted a system of recruitment in some ways more undemocratic still. Under the Selective Service Act of 1951, passed at the height of the Korean War, military service became universal obligation except for those who managed to qualify for some academic exemption. The system of academic deferment, when combined with educational reforms designed to recruit a scientific and technical elite, created a national system of manpower selection in which minorities and the poor provided the recruits for the vast peacetime army, while the middle class, eager to escape military service, attended college in unprecedented numbers. The National Defense Act of 1958, designed to speed up production of engineers and scientists, gave added impetus to the boom of higher education, which lasted until the 1970s. Meanwhile, the schools devoted increasing attention to identification of able students and discouragement of others. More efficient systems of tracking, together with an increased emphasis on math and science, recruited growing numbers of college students, but did little to improve their training. Efforts to extend techniques first perfected by teachers of the new math into the social sciences and humanities produced students deficient in factual knowledge and intolerant of instruction that did not address their need for creativity and self-expression. When we wrote at schools, As Joyce Maynard remembers her experience in the early 60s, we were encouraged to forget about grammar and concern ourselves with free self-expression. Maybe not write at all, but instead to non-verbally communicate. Evidence of the spread of such methods and their disastrous effect on the students' minds can be cited in profusion. Under cover of Enlightenment ideologies, teachers, like parents, followed the line of least resistance, hoping to pacify their students and to sweeten the time they had to spend in school by making the experience as painless as possible. Hoping to avoid confrontations and quarrels, they leave students without guidance, meanwhile treating them as if they were both incapable of serious exertion. Frederick Exley, who brought beefly in public schools in upstate New York, describes the demoralizing effect of the unwritten rule that everybody passes. The faculty had been rendered moral monsters, asked to keep open, cool, and detached, and appraising half the students. We were able to keep the other eye and winking at the rest of the students were passed from a grade to grade and eventually into a world that would be all too happy to teach them as they drifted churlishly from disappointment to disaster what the American schools should have been teaching them all along, that even in America, failure is part of life. Institutions of cultural transmission, school, church, family, which have been expected to counter the narcissistic trend of our culture, have instead been shaped into its image. While growing body of progressive theory justifies capitulation on the growth that such institutions best serve society when they provide a mirror reflection of it, the downward drift of public education accordingly continues. The steady dilution of intellectual standards in the name of relevance and the other progressive slogans and the abandonment of foreign languages, the abandonment of history in favor of social problems, and the general retreat from intellectual discipline of any kind, often necessitated by the need for more rudimentary forms of discipline in order to maintain the standards of safety. I find that passage particularly illuminating because we had two calls of school reform, and one of those calls that called for self-expression and more self-expression was actually aimed at creating an elite. The self-expression was made so that teachers could sort who expressed themselves well and in line with the project and theories of mind implied by that elite. Now, this sounded a lot like the people who called for universalized basic education when they called on democratic grounds, that we should not be doing the Deweyan reforms of forcing people into vocational tech, but giving them a basic standard high-level education in the basic things of reading, writing, and history. This was for basic competency, and other forms of socialization should be left to the family. Now, while that's actually written into law in a lot of states, it's not what actually happens, and a lot of our current culture wars around the schooling reflects this. But what I read this for is to show you how little has changed in this split back and forth, despite universal education. And universal higher education for high school is basically achieved in the 70s, around the time Lasch was writing. That we still go through this. In the aughts, we needed more scientists and we were pushing STEM. We needed more coders, more mathematicians, and other people for sorters. In college, while initially used for people in the middle classes to escape the military as a sorting device, has become the sorting device itself, and now comes with it a requisite debt load. So not only are you sorted by university, which you do in New Dot 10, and your sorting is based on who you know more than anything that you do. But it functions to perform the same elite function as the military planners of the 1950s. And I want to remind people that James Burnham did not see the colleges as the creators of the professional managerial elite or the managerial class, but the military. And I would argue today, a lot of real research that's done at the foundation of our society is not done in either the universities or the private sector enterprise, but is done by the military, because the military still needs basic research, although its ambitions have been curtailed in the coming years as we look increasingly like Fortress North America. These are degenerative signs, but signs where our modern theories of education haven't really changed the fundamental pattern. And the question I want to ask you is why? I find Lasch's answer about the culture of narcissism to basically rename the problem, not totally explain it. And for those who want to read this on your own, as I said, it's in The Culture of Narcissism. I'm holding a new edition. This one was printed in, this has a new cover. This edition was the one printed in 1991, and this cover is from about 2 years ago. The section is Schooling in the New Illiteracy, which starts on page 151 in this current edition. And I read out loud to you basic education versus national defense education, because it parallels what we went through from the aughts to the teens, where there was an encouragement of STEM and basic educational standards, but was aimed at sorting. There's been a response to that aimed at pushing back against those standards, but they have mostly been done to make school easier, since we now use school probably more for the social functions of daycare and of making sure students eat than we do even for education, which is why when we shut it down for any reason, there's so many social problems. We use the school for social functions because we have erased all other areas of social functions for children in their lives, including private ones. Parents work too much. There's too low involvement in non-business institutions in general. But the fundamental trends remain, and we see this shift from the 50s to the 60s being reflected in the teens. The new math came back again. Similarly, focusing on self-expression over rote learning. Both, by the way, are necessary. You might go, well, it's not necessary in age of chatbot GI, except when you ask, well, who's going to maintain the chatbots? The chatbots are as good as what's put in them. This will be part of a short series I'll be doing for a while, where I take passages from these books and explain why I find them relevant. I'll also link the reference to the books in the show notes. Have a great day, and if you are interested, there's a Patreon where you can like and subscribe.